lots of people concerned, I think because of the pictures that are reproduced after the protests in the media, that they seem to specifically seek out the handful of people who have anti-Semitic placards. But if you were trying to reassure Joseph, what would you say to him?
That there was the largest single contingent of Jews yet on the Jewish bloc on that march. If we have a political opponent, it's the people who are supportive of the state of Israel and its actions in Gaza. It is certainly not all Jews, because Jews are a very prominent part now of this movement. One of the things that the movement in solidarity with the Palestinians has done is to revive that very long-standing and very powerful strand of radical Jewish opinion, which has always sided with the Palestinians and has been a part of the anti-apartheid movement, the civil rights movement. And frankly, it's very good to see those Jewish voices raised in this issue as well.
Mm. Does it frustrate you? Because I noticed that so many of the pieces about today began with the 11 arrests. And I was just looking at, the number of arrests in football matches during the year 2022 to 2023 was almost 2,500. There's an equivalent number of arrests per 10,000 at Glastonbury and at the Notting Hill Carnival. You expect with an event of this size for there to be a few arrests, but does it frustrate you that seems to be the line that a lot of the media leads with?
Yes, I mean it's very dispiriting to read that kind of coverage, because, as you say, it's completely out of all proportion to anything that actually happens on the marches. Very few people, very few organisations can gather, as we believe we did today, 250,000 people in one place at one time. Not only that, but to do it for the 9th time since last October. And for there to be so few arrests. There are more arrests for shoplifting in Tottenham Court Road on an average Saturday than there are on our demonstrations. There were, I think, 11 arrests today. 5 of those were for walking in Hyde Park, because Hyde Park wasn't part of the prescribed route by the police. Now, some of this, quite frankly, is simply an attempt to demonise what are, as even the police are forced to admit, overwhelmingly peaceful demonstrations.
Mm. And how would you categorise the mood of today's demonstration? Because it's, I believe, the first one after the invasion of Rafah. And it's now got to a situation where I have so few people on my switchboard who are looking to defend the Israeli government's actions in Gaza. It's become pretty much an indefensible position now. So what has that done, I guess, to the mood of the crowd on these protests?
Well, I think that they believe, and I think this has been true from the very beginning, but it is now more true than ever, that they are reflective of the opinions of the whole population in this country. You may have seen the YouGov poll earlier this week, which showed that 66% of people in this country are in favour of a ceasefire, and that has risen by 7% since last November. Only 13% of people in this country believe that the Israeli military should continue with its offensive. So we think we're speaking for the majority of people in this country, even though that voice is a tiny minority among our political class of any party. And this is something, I was one of the organisers of the demonstrations against the Iraq war, and we are seeing again a massive rupture between the political elite in this country and what the majority of citizens in this country believe. And I think the mood is one of horror. You cannot watch. I mean, your previous caller said that people are weaponizing this. You don't need to weaponize anything to see that 30,000 people, overwhelmingly civilians, half of them women and children, being killed, and to be horrified and want it to stop. That's an absolutely natural human reaction. So I don't think we need to look very far for why people feel animated, horrified, appalled that our government can't seem to find its way to saying the simplest things about this, that it frustrates moves that the United Nations, that it abuses the International Court of Justice when the South African case about genocide was brought there. I think most people in this country think the government has very badly lost its way. and that the opposition is following it into the political wilderness. And that's for the second time in a generation. I mean, for me, for the second time in a generation, to watch our country commit an absolutely gross, murderous foreign policy mistake is to beg people's faith in the political system, frankly.
John Rees, thank you so much. National Officer at Stop the War, who helped organise the event Ceasefire Now, Stop the Genocide in Gaza. Adil has called from Wembley, and I believe you were at the march today. Is that correct?
Hi, Natasha. I wasn't at today's particular march, but I've been on a few of the marches of recent past. And look, I want to start by saying that as a man of Abrahamic faith myself, I have to sympathise with anti-Semitism globally. It's a real phenomenon, and nobody here is trying to dispel that. So in the same way that Islamophobia is a thing. People who dress differently or have religious attire will be prone to racist jibes, will be prone to things that are being said to them that other people don't agree with. But I've been to these demonstrations, several of these demonstrations, and I have to admit that the non-Muslim white representation, be they Jewish, Catholic, or atheists, is in equal proportion than as many Muslims and Arabs that you've seen on these marches. I've seen several Orthodox Jews on these marches. I've seen several Jews for Palestine, Jews for peace, Jews against the war, and that is logical because a lot of people over here, irrespective of their religion, irrespective of their belief or color, believe that this war on Gaza is now starting to be grossly disproportionate. It's horrific, the images out of Gaza. You don't need to look far, social media, Instagram, Facebook, to see people, the children's bodies blown to bits, the starvation, lines of trucks not being allowed to enter into Gaza, settlers blockading that. It's the Israeli establishment that people are against. It's the war that people are against. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Calling this protest, calling people's stance against Israel's so-called incursion of Gaza or war, whatever term you'd like to call it, calling that anti-Semitism is akin to calling any sort of criticism of Qatar's World Cup as Islamophobia.
I agree with you. And there's no other circumstance in which we do that, where we hold the government of one particular country and their policy to represent an entire diaspora of people or an entire religion. Adil, thank you so much for your call and for sharing that insight. This person, anonymous on 84850, said holding Israel to higher standards than other states is anti-Semitism. If the UK had 1,000 people held hostage in an adjacent territory, it would do the same. I mean, you've got absolutely no proof for that assertion. And I just can't foresee a circumstance where, say, some terrorists came to England and took 1,000 hostages and took them to Wales and hid in Wales, where we would support the bombardment of innocent Welsh citizens to the extent of what's happening in Gaza and not receive robust criticism from the international community and very probably be breaking international law. I just can't see that Israel is being held to a higher standard than any other country in the world would be. I just can't wrap my head around that as an argument. It could be, of course, that there's something that I'm not seeing, but I just find myself unable to agree with you, I'm afraid, anonymous correspondent.